See if you can guess what these shadows portray. Oh, that's pretty easy, right? 3 adorable little children holding hands, right? Here's another one. What's that a shadow of? Anyone out there? Shout it out. A bike. But this just isn't any ordinary bike. This is my bike. This is my specialized bike. This is my carbon frame bike that weighs less than 10 pounds. This is a shadow of my bike that if I am going down the hill and the wind is at my back, I have clocked 35 miles per hour. That's a shadow of my beautiful bike. Hey, what's this a shadow of? Tree, that's pretty easy. Now this next one is going to be really hard, so kind of brace yourself, all right? All right? What's this a shadow of? Yeah. How many own cats? Raise a hand. Yeah, some of us do. Of course, you know, Lisa and I have 2 cats. They're named Frog and Ribbit. Of course, we had to announce publicly about a year and a half ago that Toad, remember it used to be Frog and Toad. Toad croaked. You know that, right? I'm serious. He actually died. But I would say all the cats I've ever known have thought very highly of themselves. We'll come back to this, so store that in the back of your brain. Shadows. Shadows are interesting, right? Shadows tell us something about the shape, the size, and the degree of what we're looking at. Shadows are a way to understand much of the Old Testament, especially the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the books of Moses. This is what Hebrews chapter 10, 11 says. The old system, that's the system of altars and sacrificial animals and tabernacle and high priest. That old system in the Torah, the teaching of Moses, right, in Genesis through Deuteronomy, that's just a shadow. That's just a shadow, a dim preview of the good things to come, not the good things themselves. And this artwork actually tells us quite graphically what the good things to come are. What is the good thing to come? It being the death of Jesus for you and me. Shadows. That's a good way to understand the book of Leviticus. So as we go into this joyful Easter season, we pause for more than a moment to look at the book of Leviticus, the 3rd book of Moses, right? So for 6 weeks, we are going to look at Leviticus through this title, Shadows. Shadows coming from Hebrews 12, verse 1. Shadows of who? Shadows of the Savior. We get started with chapter 3 in Leviticus, 1 through 5, and this would be the so-called peace offering. It's a shadow of the Savior, the peace offering is. Peace, shalom in the Hebrew, is what we see in Leviticus 3, 1 through 5, but we see peace only as a shadow. Peace. When I say that word, what comes to your mind? You probably think about the North Koreans not nuking us sometime this summer, right? You think of peace as the absence of warfare. You think of peace as, well, at least we're not screaming and hollering at each other anymore. We got a little peace. That's not what the Hebrew word shalom, translated peace, means. With me on this? It doesn't mean the absence of warfare. It means the presence of healing. The presence of healing. Isaiah 53 verse 5 helps us out. The punishment that brought us peace, shalom, was upon him. By his wounds we're healed. So peace is God's gift of healing. Shalom restores, shalom renews, shalom repairs. Another way to understand God's gift of peace is through a cracked egg. Humpty Dumpty, his parents told him, I bet, But Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, and of course Humpty Dumpty then had a great fall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put that darn egg back together again. But shalom can. God's gift of peace repairs, restores, renews, heals. So in Leviticus chapter 3, 1 through 5, when God gives us the gift of shalom, He is guaranteeing that the broken, messy, sticky fragments of our lives are going to be put back together again. And who doesn't need that? A study was done in 2016 asking tens of thousands of Americans about their mental health. And most of them had not been to Florida for a week, all right? They were rank and file folks like me. The study showed that at least 117 million American adults have had or continue to have high levels of anxiety. Their lives are falling apart. Think about that. 117 million Americans at some point in their life feel as though life is unbearable. I can't go on. It is that dark. The World Health Organization that did this survey tells us that the United States, being the most wealthy nation in the world, is also, ironically, the most depressed nation in the world. Money can't buy me love. Money can't buy me happiness. Just listen to what people are saying. It's just too tough. I don't think I can go on. I'm not sure it's worth it anymore. I don't see God at all. I feel like David against Goliath. And you know, since 2016, there are 25 new drugs on the market in North America that will help you with anxiety. It is epidemic. So what does society offer us when we feel like we're Humpty Dumpty and it's just all a big, ooey gooey, sticky, impossible mess? Well, you've heard what people say. One group over here says, buy a bigger house. Another group says, you need a prettier blouse. Another group says, you need a different spouse. Another group says, quit being such a big, lazy louse. And we believe it, don't we? Oh, a bigger house, a brighter blouse, oh, a better spouse. Quit being a louse. Doesn't work. It's like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall. It just doesn't work. It seems finally that nothing works. Nothing is going to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Well, think again. Because God gives the gift of shalom. Shalom, remember, not the absence of warfare, it's the presence of healing, restoration, repair, renewal. And how does God do it? He does it through Leviticus 3, 1 to 5. I want to work through these verses with you in an equation or formula format. In other words, there's going to be 3 pieces to the equation, and the equation is going to equal something. So here we go. First, if you want shalom, there it is in Leviticus 3, verse 1. If you want shalom, if you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, then you need a perfect sacrifice. Perfect. This is how Leviticus 3 opens up. If you present an animal from the herd as a peace, shalom offering, to the Lord. So these Israelites, they knew what it was like to see their life in a billion pieces. They said, well, let's do this. Let's get an animal and go before the Lord. But it must be male or female, and it must have no defects. Perfect sacrifice. No blemish. It can't be blind, can't be lame, can't be limping. Forget going to a Walmart or Kmart for one of these offerings. Forget going online and getting a used one from Amazon. No, no, you need the best of the best, the prized animal, the most precious and valuable in your herd or flock. You want shalom? This is where you start. Second, you need a confession of sins. This is how Leviticus continues. Lay your hand on the animal's head. Now, what's all that about? Are you petting the animal? No. This was the Old Testament way of confessing your sin, of placing all of your muck, mire, mess, and mistake on the animal. So you confess your sin, and then you slaughter it at the entrance of the tabernacle. So if I want shalom, I need to confess my part in the Mass. And I know it's hard. That's why we cry about it. I know. Yeah. So sometimes the mess isn't my mistake. You with me on this? Sometimes we're just the wrong place, the wrong time, and life breaks up into a million pieces. But most of the time, if we're honest with ourselves, the mess has to do, in large part, with what I've done, right? I haven't listened enough, I haven't prayed enough, I haven't been patient enough, I haven't trusted Jesus enough. You see, there's usually a part that I have played in my Mass. And so if I want shalom, I need to come clean with my part. Have you noticed when it comes to confessing sin that there is one animal that does it best and another animal that does it worst? I figured this out years ago. Before we were cat people, we were dog people. We had a beagle dog named Howard. Oh, Howard, those were the great days. Howard was easy when it came to confessing sin. Cats, Frog and Ribbit, not so much. You understand. When you come home and your dog has sinned, committed high treason, you walk in and that dog greets you with a fawning spirit, but you can tell this dog is guilty because this dog has squinty eyes, darting back and forth. The ears are down. Of course, so is the head. And where is the tail? Between his legs. All you have to do, once you spot the crime, right? The mess on the floor, a broken whatnot, or a chewed up shoe. Once you have spotted the crime, all you have to do to crush that dog's fawning spirit is, in a very low tone, with "I'm the master" coming straight out of you, is to look down at that dog and say, "Oh, how could you?" An instant canine collapse ensues. That dog will throw himself on your mercy. Cats, good luck with that. Cats shirk responsibility. Cats are too proud to confess. Cats are too aloof, too distant. Leviticus invites us to come clean, to confess our part in the Mass, and not be proud and pompous and distant and accusatory and scapegoating and pointing the finger and blaming people. Oh, no. confess. Yeah, I did that. That was a bad decision. And what happens when you lay your hand on the animal and confess your sin? That animal takes it all away. Isn't that great? Who would not want a deal like this? You put all of your brokenness, all of your pain, all of your sin, you put it on the animal when you lay your hand on the head and confess your sin. So a perfect sacrifice plus a confession of sin. Well, you need something else. Remember I told you there's 3 parts to this. We need what? The shedding of blood. Then Aaron's sons, the priest, will splatter its blood because the sacrifice has been killed. And splatter against all the sides of the altar. Well, that doesn't sound fair. The animal that you just confessed upon, that animal now is sliced and diced and dead. What's going on? The sacrifice is no longer perfect. The sacrifice now has all of my mess and mistakes and mayhem upon it. The sacrifice who had no sin has now become sinful. And so the soul that sins is the soul that dies. That's Ezekiel 18, verse 2. So you have to take the soul and the body of the sacrificial animal, and you need to take the blood, once it's dead, and splatter it against the sides of the altar. Leviticus, we're going to find out, is a very bloody book. The word blood appears 89 times in Leviticus. Why is that? Hebrews chapter 9, verse 22. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sin. So, we need a perfect sacrifice, without defect, without blemish. We need to come clean, confess our part in the Mass. And then we need blood to be shed. Then what? Remember I told you, A plus B plus C equals, this is God's equation, God's gift of shalom. So then you celebrate shalom, that hey, look, things are back together again. God has repaired, restored, renewed. So this is how it continues. The priest must present part. That's an important word here. Not all of the sacrifice goes to God. Only part. What part does God get in this shalom offering? This includes, God's part, all the fat around the internal organs, the 2 kidneys, the fat around them near the loins, and the long lobe of the liver. These must be removed with the kidneys, and Aaron's sons, the priest, will burn them on top of the burnt offering on the wood burning on the altar. So what's up with God getting all the fat? Oh, I know what you're thinking. This is what I think too. God is telling us, don't eat fat. Right? It's right there in the Bible. Well, no, it's not that simple. In the Old Testament, the fatty part was considered the most precious part, the best piece of the animal. So God gets the fat and the fat around the kidneys, and the long lobe of the liver, and all that stuff, implying that there's stuff left over for who? The worshipers. So what do they do with everything that's left over? They have a meal. They have a celebration. They have a banquet. They have a feast. They have a celebration of shalom. But this is just a shadow. Wouldn't it be really cool if we had the real picture of this? Wouldn't this just be awesome if we didn't have just the shadow, but we had the real deal? We do. We do. And here it is. Oh my. Jesus and doubting Thomas in the upper room, the week after Easter. Here is no shadow of shalom. Here is the real deal. You heard it in the gospel reading. 3 times in John chapter 20, verses 19, 21, and 26, 3 times Jesus says what? In his native Aramaic, it sounded like this: Salam Lakem. In Hebrew, Shalom Lakem. In English, you know, peace to you. Can you imagine what these Jews were thinking at that point when Jesus accents the gift of shalom? You need to understand that the first book the Jews learned today and learned in Jesus' day was what? The book of Leviticus. Imagine what these Jews are thinking when Jesus says, peace to you, shalom lakem. Oh. There's the perfect sacrifice. Oh, he's the one that takes all the mess away. Oh, look at the gaping hole in his side. The blood was shed, and now it's time for a celebration of shalom. A 17th century Italian Baroque artist painted this masterpiece. He only had one name. Maybe you've heard of him, Caravaggio. Caravaggio paints Jesus and doubting Thomas. And look what Caravaggio does. He not only invites Thomas to put his finger into Jesus' side, but in this painting, Jesus actually helps Thomas. And you need to understand, in 17th century European art, this was groundbreaking. Up to this point in European Christian art, it was always with halos around Jesus. It was always with clouds in the background. It always looked mythical and otherworldly, but not Caravaggio. Oh, no way. Caravaggio breaks new ground, is showing how real the resurrection is. This is no myth, folks. This is no story tale. Caravaggio says there's flesh and blood. You can actually put your finger into the Savior's side. This is the real deal. In fact, if you look closely, Caravaggio has put dirt under Thomas's thumb and fingernail. So a perfect sacrifice, plus the confession of sin, plus the shedding of blood equals a celebration of shalom. You know what was happening to these disciples when Jesus showed up after Easter? They were having their 19th nervous breakdown. They were in the upper room with doors locked for fear, anxiety, dread of the Jews. They couldn't go on until Jesus showed up. Until Jesus shows up with real flesh and blood and a body that had been dead and is now alive forevermore. Talk about shalom. Previewed in Leviticus chapter 3. Stunningly delivered in John chapter 20. To people who are so stressed out, wondering if Humpty Dumpty can ever be put back together again. And Jesus says, not once, not twice, 3 times, Shalom Lakem. So what are we waiting on? We've tried the bigger house. Maybe you've tried the brighter blouse. Maybe you think, well, another spouse. Or maybe you say, I'll quit being a louse. None of that works. This works. Shalom works. Every single time. That's why Jesus is called, a great verse, Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. You shall call him Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Sar Shalom in Hebrew, Prince of Peace. So what is Easter? If Easter is anything, Easter is a celebration of shalom. And how can we be so sure? We go back to Isaiah 53, verse 5. The punishment that brought us shalom was upon him, and by his wounds and by his resurrection, we are healed. So I invite you today, every day is a day to celebrate shalom. Well then, let's do it by singing the next hymn.